Germany is slowly starting to get back to some semblance of normalcy, with stores opening back up to the public. CNN's Fred Pleitgen is in Berlin. Fred, I know the Chancellor Angela Merkel dealt with the virus very aggressively, very early. Is there any concern that reopening Germany too soon could lead to a second wave?
Yeah, there certainly is, and there certainly is on the part of Angela Merkel. And you're absolutely right, Jake. She always has been one to move fairly slowly as far as loosening some of these restrictions, always had all of that rooted in science as well. And the other thing that she's also done, she's also been in lockstep with state governors here in this country to make sure that everybody moves forward at the same pace. Now, Angela Merkel today said, look, the fact that Germany has been able to loosen some of these restrictions is due to the discipline of many people in Germany who really adhere to all these physical distancing measures. Now some smaller shops were able to reopen, and she said people really need to watch out, not be complacent, because if there is another spike in corona cases, all these new freedoms will go away again, and certainly there would be other restrictions as well.
Today is Monday, April 20th, 2020. Current numbers. 2.46 million, 169,000 total deaths around the world. In the United States, 782,000 confirmed cases, 41,000 total deaths. Our daily death rate is significantly dropping. You can see the last 3 days we had on April 17th, 2,528. April 18th, 1,867, and yesterday, April 19th, 1,561 deaths. So that's some good news.
What are your thoughts on yesterday's video? We've had like a full day to reflect on Sweden, and I edited last night's video, and so I went through and found some B-roll and some news stories from Sweden within the last week.
Yeah.
And then we had the B-roll that one of the guests gave us.
Mm-hmm.
Before I tell you my thoughts, have you had any new conclusions? Or
I don't know if I've had new conclusions, but I read a bunch of the comments on the YouTube video yesterday, and I think the big takeaway for me is, one, people in Sweden are a lot more reasonable and educated than Americans, but two, I don't think what Sweden is doing is that different than surrounding countries, especially, and I don't know that it's that different than what we're doing in the United States. It's certainly not going to be that different than what we're about to do in the United States coming up in the next week or two.
what are we about to do in the United States?
Well, you know, I think Trump is just starting to say, okay, we have to like open up schools again, or we have to open up some shops again, depending on where the levels are in different cities.
That's a huge difference, though. Like, what Sweden is doing is they're not closing their schools in, what do we call it, like necessary business?
Mm-hmm.
That's all been closed in the United States. Like in Charleston, all restaurants, I believe, are closed. Most towns have said any non-critical business needs to shut down.
Yeah.
That's a huge, that means every single person needs the PPP loan program.
Well, I agree. I mean, I agree that that's the case right now, but I'm saying I bet in the near future, I just assumed watching the videos that, everything is business as usual and everybody's going to bars and restaurants every day. But after talking to the Swedes yesterday, it sounds like although some of those places are open, maybe many of them are open, there are still restrictions in place. You can't have more than 50 people in a group.
I just looked at that B-roll and I'm like, that looks like any Sunday afternoon in any town before COVID. Like the restaurants are full of people. People aren't wearing masks. Everyone's walking their dogs. Everyone's playing.
Yeah.
And maybe it looks like that in the parks and places in America, but I have my finger on Charleston's pulse because my sister still lives there, and I don't think restaurants are even open. I think it's all takeout.
Yeah, well, I think that's the current mandate.
I don't know. I just watched that, and it seemed a little eye-opening to me that Sweden looks like they're at 50% of the business that they used to be. They're not at zero, but...
See, I don't know. One of the guys, I think maybe it was Shell, was talking about how much trouble the small businesses are in Sweden. I think it's easy for us to think that if we just open the businesses in America, then we could be making money again. But that's not true. Just because the restaurant is open doesn't mean that people will want to eat there. And if you're already opening or running your business on extremely small margins, and now more than 50% of your customers don't feel comfortable going there anymore, then it doesn't matter if you're allowed to open or not.
Yeah, but 50% income is still better than 10% income or
Maybe
0% income.
Maybe so, but you could also make the argument that the second these restaurant owners realize that, oh, just because we're allowed to open doesn't mean that the patrons are coming back, now the real layoffs begin. Right now, maybe people are getting the PPP loans, they're holding people for 2.5 months, they think that it's just going to come right back the second this is all over. I do not expect that to happen.
Yeah, and so many of the commenters are just saying, look at the death rate. Sweden has, if you do the math, it's 10% of people that get coronavirus are dying versus Denmark right next door. That is like 3%, 2%.
First of all, I bet Sweden with less lockdown has a higher death rate currently. But I'm not sure that you can really compare countries when countries have completely different testing numbers and testing procedures. Jennifer, the doctor from Sweden that we talked to yesterday, said that she deals with COVID patients on a daily basis and they do no testing on them.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, then you would expect their numbers to be really inflated towards the death side.
Well, you know, Pi was saying that weeks ago. I've seen so many medical people on YouTube that I've been watching. And the big takeaway that I keep getting, that we're all trying to argue, and sometimes we're arguing for it, and then other times, like I'm about to do, I'm going to back away a little bit, and people online are going to argue. I think none of the numbers are accurate one bit. I mean, the doctor here that gave us the antibody test, this doctor is saying that when you look at South Korea, Iceland, Germany, Denmark, the Princess Diamond cruise, maybe even the aircraft carrier, it's looking like the numbers are actually going to be 0.2 to 0.4%, which is slightly higher than the seasonal flu. Now, that's the death rate, and I think you wrote, should we care about the death rate or should we care about the total number of deaths? If this is way more contagious, but just slightly more deadly, more people will die. But, you know, there's doctors here. We had that episode a week ago from CNN where they were proposing that maybe the numbers are similar to flu in terms of the death rate. And so I just keep thinking, like, we have no real information that's valid. Every country is completely different. Our death rates are 10% in Italy, and maybe some of these countries, if they're true, are 0.2%.
Right.
That is an insane amount of deviation, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like
crazy.
nobody is testing accurately. Somebody just linked to a video that I'll put in right now that basically says these antibody tests are pointless because we're just checking for IgG and IgM, but the protein on top of the virus itself has 4 different proteins that it can bind to. And so if we're not testing all 4 of them, then maybe you're negative for 2, but maybe it can combine to a different one and you're dying from something else.
So you're telling me I might have had COVID?
You could have COVID. Our tests could just be inaccurate. There's still no evidence that you're getting immune from having this already.
So my question is, these kits are being used now everywhere. What is missing here to make these assays truly reliable? What is missing? You're an expert.
That's an excellent question, and is precisely the subject of research that is taking place in my laboratory at Harvard Medical School. And so the missing link is the specificity of the immune response. So to the people who are listening and watching this, the virus expresses the antibodies that are produced by the host, by somebody who's infected with the virus. There are 4 different protein targets that the virus produces. And so antibodies can be produced against any one of those 4. And it's even more complex because there is a range of antibody types that are produced. These are the different immunoglobulins, IgA, IgG, IgM, and there's some minor ones, IgD and IgE. But in this particular disease, which is a mucosal disease, that is, it affects the mucus lining, IgA turns out to be important, IgM turns out to be important, and IgG turns out to be important. But each one of those different classes, there is a diversity of responses to each of those 4 proteins targets that are on the virus. And so nobody knows yet which of those antibody responses and which of those proteins is an interaction that results in what's called neutralization.
Right.
That is not just binding to the virus, but
Yeah.
binding to the virus in a way that activates the immune system to eliminate the virus from the body. And so that's the missing link right now.
So again, I don't know. I'm getting more and more frustrated with all of this. And I think it's refreshing to see people in Sweden that just trust their government and say, like, we're along for the ride and let's see how it goes. But I think in America, the longer this goes on, I think once jobs start really deteriorating and once companies have to start actually firing their employees and these food banks are running out of more and more food and people are having less and less income coming in and our government stops being able to fund everybody, I think this can get really bad really soon if we don't start letting people go back to work. And I'm really concerned about that. And when I look at the numbers, and the numbers all seem to be just like non-existent, really. We're not testing people. And the tests that we are doing now may not even be all that accurate. If you're looking at the antibody tests, I'm just starting to think we've all made these reactions. I mean, I opened yesterday's video with the prior head epidemiologist of Sweden, and he said there is no scientific studies that say all of these measures do anything. And that hand washing.
Did you watch the whole video? I mean, can you explain that? Obviously, social distancing would have an effect if you lived in a cabin in the woods and never saw
Social
people.
distancing does, but social isolation?
Are we going to see second and third spikes now after this?
It will be part of the exit strategy, because the only way to check that if you're taking away one restriction, let's say we'll open the schools again, as an example. How do you evaluate that? You have to say, numbers are going up again. More people are dying. We have to stop that. We have to pull back that softening and try another. That's what exit strategy will be in all countries. Countries will ease up a little on a restriction, see what happens over the next 2-3 weeks. It didn't work very well. We resume that. We try another restriction. We lift that one. It worked. And so this is, every country will have to do it that way. And that means that the increasing number of deaths will be part of checking which strategy should be kept and not.
So what should we be doing instead?
I remember when I first heard, which is now 6 weeks ago, about the different draconic measures that were taken, I asked myself, how are they going to climb down from that one? When will they open the schools again? What should be the criterion to open the schools? Did any one of the strong and very decisive politicians in Europe think about how to get out of this when they introduced it? And I think that would be a problem for the UK as well.
So let's take as a comparison the neighbouring countries in Scandinavia, because a lot of people are sending around these charts that show that Denmark and Norway and Finland have had much fewer deaths on a per capita basis, and Sweden, the rate is still climbing. And they take that as proof, essentially, that Sweden should have gone into a more draconian lockdown. What do you say to those people?
Well, first, it's not true for Denmark. Secondly, one important thing is that Norway, the nursing homes in Norway are usually quite small, whereas the nursing homes in Sweden are quite big with hundreds of people, which means that if you get the virus into one nursing home in Norway, it will affect far fewer people than a big one. So that's part of the reason. It's not all the reason. For Finland, the epidemic never really took off there. They started their measures before it had even started. But I think we should have this discussion a year from now. Let's decide that. We do this on the 17th of April, 2021. I think that the difference between countries will be quite small in the end.
He made some statement that you put in there that, like, there's no scientific evidence that shows social distancing works. All we should be worrying about is washing our hands. But I'm like, well, hold on a minute. That doesn't make any logical sense.
I think his fear is that, and I'll watch the video and put a clip in this video, but I think the fear is just once you undo all of those solutions, it just comes right back. That, like, you can control it, but, like, you can't solve the problem here.
Right. So that makes sense. But here's where Sweden and those who feel like we should just get back to work could be making a huge mistake. If we are able to come out with a cheap, accurate test in the near future, and somehow we can create hundreds of millions of them rather quickly, then I really feel like we could make a huge dent in this, and on that day we could go back to work. I mean, imagine if every American had enough tests for every single day before you get up and go outside and go to work or whatever. You just prick your finger in, and then in 2 seconds it tells you if you have it or not.
I don't think that's reasonable.
You don't think that's like
I mean, we just spent $10 on a test. Imagine if you had to do that every day. Every American now has a $10 fee. We don't have tests coming out of America, as far as I know. A lot of these tests are coming out of China.
Well, okay.
They're inaccurate. They're not working.
Maybe doing it every day is ridiculous, but if you did it once per week, there is a level that it's reasonable to do, especially when you consider like how much money we're losing by not working. It's obviously much cheaper to do
I don't know
these
how you
tests.
can compare the test with a vaccine, but somebody did a speculation of if you wanted to vaccinate everyone in Germany, the numbers were crazy. It was like 70,000 people per day for like the next 6 months or something. And it was like, it just doesn't seem feasible to do that. Now, I don't know about testing. You're going to have a lot of Americans who, even if you prick your own finger and do the test, you're going to have a percentage of people who are going to say, I'm not doing a test. I'm not submitting to this, even
They're
if it's in their
putting
own...
the secret computer chips in the test. Don't do the test. Well, I heard someone from Germany, maybe it was one of the officials or whatever, he was comparing Germany's strategy to Sweden's strategy.
Yeah.
And he was basically saying that herd immunity is not possible. And that the amount of Germans that it would require to reach the 70% level, that people say is safe
Could
or
take
whatever.
like years.
Yeah, exactly. It would take a year and a half, and by that point...
I mean, if you run the numbers, very few people have coronavirus. Like, less than 1% in America, in the world. I mean, we talked about the numbers. You can just do the math real quick.
Well,
very few people have this.
Those are just the amount of people that have been tested. We have no idea how many people have had it.
That's true, too. So then it goes back to the testing. Like, how accurate are the tests? The other thing that I just keep trying to, wrap my mind around are the people per square mile, the population per square mile. Yesterday, I read a bunch of these stats. Sweden is 64, U.S. is 94, China is 400, Italy's 530, Denmark's 320. I looked into, New York State. New York State's 421. That's less than Italy, but higher than China. New York City, 27,000 people per square mile. And I start to think that, you keep hearing, the doctor yesterday was like, we're just waiting for it to reach the peak. And I'm thinking, but if you haven't locked down anything, and it's been months now, maybe Sweden got this before the United States, I just keep thinking, is this wave ever going to happen? Are little towns that are 20,000 people or less, a town like Charleston, which depending on how you look at it is 1 million people, or a couple 100,000 in the city center, are these populations dense enough to ever have the reaction in New York City? I was looking up the most dense places in America, and it's New York City, and then it's several other cities in New Jersey close to Manhattan.
I mean, obviously the numbers won't seem as horrific because there's just not that many people in small towns. You could never have hundreds die a day.
But you've been making the argument that maybe it's just the subway. And I'm thinking, isn't there a point where the R0 value will have to be much lower in little areas that just don't have the same traffic? I mean,
of course.
My parents go into Lowe's, they're getting in their own car, they go to Lowe's, they interact with very few people, and they go home. That's very different than interacting in Lowe's where you take the public transit in any number of cities, and then you're just face-to-face with so many more people.
I agree, but...
food culture. I mean, in my little hometown, you don't go out and socialize the same way that you do in Charleston. I mean, Charleston, everyone's going to the bar, they're bar hopping. I mean, most little towns don't even have enough bars to bar hop. There's not enough young people to even feel like you need to bar hop.
That's true, but I think a lot of small towns have the churches, they might do that for hours, multiple times a week.
Maybe that's a good counter argument.
You heard about this story, this is a month or so ago, of this small town in Georgia.
Yeah.
Where...
I think Mike Kelly said Athens, but it was maybe Albany,
I don't
Georgia.
know. But they go to this funeral, and something like one person gave it to 40 people at a single funeral. And I'm like, what are people doing at a funeral,
But when I hear stories like that, it makes me think that maybe this is way more contagious. And if it's way more contagious, maybe way more, 50, 100, 1,000 times more people have this than what we actually know. Because it does seem crazy to go to a funeral and just all these people are getting it by standing and sitting in a funeral. That just doesn't seem like that high of a risk.
Maybe you have the greeting lines sometimes at funerals where you're hugging and kissing and shaking hands with the family, and if everyone is touching the same person's hands, and then you're wiping your face, maybe that's all that it takes. I heard some doctor, I think earlier today, he was speculating that it could be from elevators. And he was saying that Italy and Spain have some of the most elevators per square mile in the world or something. I mean, that seemed like a strange hypothesis, but it makes sense. He's like, just think about it. You're going into the elevator, you're packing in, you're coughing in there. It's just like in the elevator.
Not the buttons, it's the people.
Yeah. And then, of course, you're hitting the buttons and
I
everything,
would think
too.
the subways would be way worse.
I would think so,
I was talking
too.
to my
I would
dad
think
today,
so,
and I was just like, New York, if you use the subway and you go in high hours, 5 o'clock, every single person that lives in New York City uses the subway is always like this.
Yeah.
Every single day. And
Yep.
if you say, oh, well, I'll wait till 8 o'clock, then now you're just kind of fighting for a seat. You're not like fighting for a space. But there's a point when you can't even get in. You have to wait for the next train.
But you're still sitting down on these seats that 1 million people have sat on that day, and it hasn't been cleaned yet. And if it's supposed to be able to stick to food boxes and your shoes, it's definitely sticking to your clothes. And it seems like you could get it even from that.
All I'm saying is, like, in my mind, I'm playing this out. I'm not like making a statement here.
We know what you're doing.
I like to talk to come up with an answer where a lot of people have an answer and then they say it really concisely. So,
Well, I always joke that if you let Patrick talk long enough, he'll start arguing against his own point.
yeah, and I don't think I'm really arguing. I talk to understand, and I like to bounce ideas off. But I guess what I'm thinking in the last day is that we have talked a lot about should we quarantine older people and let the young people go to work. But now I'm starting to think maybe we should quarantine people that are in a certain density population, and maybe 90% of America, Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, name all these states, maybe they really have such a small threat.
Yeah.
And then you could stack on top of that, too, the health conditions. Maybe the South is at a higher
Fatter.
risk. Yeah. Sweden, like, they're one of the healthiest communities.
Probably, yeah.
They're also one of the most homogenous societies. Like, everyone there is white.
Homogeneous?
Homogenous?
There you go.
Homogenous? They're all white. They're all the same age. They're all the same demographic. Like, and this has always been my argument that, like, America could never be Sweden because we have the people that closed our video that are out there like, open your eyes, sheep. These, cops are slitting their own throats. Like, there's crazy people in all spectrums, but we have a lot more viewpoints and a lot more demographics and a lot more diversity than places like Sweden. So if you try to like put a blanket policy over Americans, the sheer number of us, it just makes that a lot harder.
It makes me want to move to Sweden. It's like everybody's just intelligent and kind, and they just think through things
It's the
before they
most
jump to the
unpatriotic
conclusions.
thing you could say, Lee.
Well, I'm sick of everybody going crazy.
Hey, I'm totally for it too. I look at New Zealand and some of these countries, and I'm like, that's where I want to move to.
Yeah.
I could move there too, but
All right, so there's a few things that I wanted to talk about. First of all, in no particular order.
man, it is hot in here.
No, it's not.
It's like 75 degrees. I'm also like fasting today. I haven't had a single thing to eat today.
Really?
Kristen was like, why don't we fast until 5 o'clock? And I was like, sure. If I just go to work and have a coffee, I can work till 3 o'clock and be like, man, I probably should eat.
I used to be like
But
that.
then that throws off my dinner schedule. So she's like, let's go to 5. And I was like, no problem. I'm like kind of hungry right now.
It kind of gets you to start panicking a little bit, doesn't it? It's like you try to get work done, but you can just think like, oh gosh, I can't have food for a while. Even
As
if you're
long
not
as
that
I'm
hungry.
working and I've been on the phone a lot today, I can go. It's when I sit down waiting to get these lights on that I'm like, man, I'm really hungry.
First thing, the loan forbearance that a lot of people are taking advantage of, where they're either not paying
Forgiveness? What word did you say?
forbearance.
That's a new one to me. What's forbearance mean?
It's like there's a few different words that you could use for either like your rent, your mortgage, your office.
Qualified deductions that would count against,
No.
that wouldn't count against your loan?
No,
That would make your loan forgivable?
no.
What are you talking about then?
So when it comes to loan or mortgage forbearance, the idea that you are basically postponing payments and you might have to pay 100% of the money that you
Okay.
waited to pay right at the end of the forbearance period. So maybe that's in like 3 months from now. You owe one payment of 3 months worth of rent or mortgage, which kind of defeats the whole purpose. Like who's going to have the money all of a sudden
Yeah, it's
day
like
we
making
open
the
back up.
situation worse.
Right. The other way is like, okay, we're just extending the length of your mortgage, and if you have a 30-year mortgage, now it's 30 years and 3 months, or however long you
Okay.
postpone it. The other way that you could do it is you could add just a little bit of money to your monthly payment
Makes
each
sense.
month so that your loan payoff date is the exact same. So people all over the United States are taking advantage of this, whether they're renting or they own, and they're just trying to get this done. But it's starting to come out now that when you do this, it's hitting your credit score. And the banks are putting notes in your credit report that say you have chosen not to pay your rent or your mortgage. What this is doing is it's making it potentially impossible for people who had planned to refinance their homes or their properties, whatever they have. They're no longer going to be able to do it because their credit score has now been lowered to a point where the banks will not refinance their loans, and this was never told to them before.
And can you explain this? Because we have had near historic lows. I mean, we bought our houses 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
2013, I think, is when I bought my house. I had a 3.35% interest rate. Has it gone lower than that? I thought it was going up.
It was going up. I think maybe we've hit record lows recently.
But it's like still at 4%.
I think it's pretty low.
4.5.
I think it's pretty low, but
Are people? I guess what I'm trying to get at is: are people trying to refinance now when they couldn't have refinanced any time recently? And how much? There comes a point when it's only like 0.5% that maybe refinancing doesn't make sense because there's fees and stuff involved in doing that, right?
I don't think that's the only reason, though. I think a lot of people have equity in their homes that they have in the back of their mind as a safety net.
Okay.
So if you're fired from your job, but you have $200,000 in equity in your house, and all you have to do is go to a bank and do a couple, little paperwork, and boom, $200,000 is deposited into your bank account. Well, now you don't really have anything to worry about. You could pay for your house for years. You could potentially live for years with no job.
Yeah.
But now, because they've taken advantage of this forbearance, they may not actually be able to do that.
So you're saying there's part of this underlying bubble that is getting weaker.
Exactly. Something else that I noticed.
And I know people get mad when we talk about this, but on some, I can see it both ways. Like on one hand, it's like you were dealt this hand that nobody predicted. It's like this black swan event.
Who?
The American people.
Okay.
People with mortgages.
Yep.
And so you're like, man, are you really going to penalize people who like their job has been suspended in this frozen, weird atmosphere that we're in? But on the other hand, it's like if you don't pay your rent, shouldn't your credit score get hit? Like,
yeah, I think maybe the point is that they should have been up front with that from the very beginning. It's like you shouldn't offer these safety nets to help people, but then go, oh, by the way, it's not really helping you, and you owe us all this money in 3 months from now. And the other thing that I'm noticing is that credit card companies and stuff are saying, don't worry, guys, you don't have to pay your
monthly
payment.
Your payment.
But we are still charging you interest.
Yeah.
We're just not going to charge you like a late fee or something, which might be $10 or $25 or something, which is pretty insignificant.
I think the guy who asked us a question on a show a few days ago, that's what he was saying. He was like, oh, the good news, I don't have to pay a $100 fee.
Yeah.
But the bad news is I still have the interest payment, which is like a ballooning effect.
Yeah.
So if you stop paying your credit card, it's going to balloon to the point where like maybe it's impossible to ever pay it down.
Yeah. So that's something else that's pretty bad. I saw a Dave Ramsey clip. In case you guys don't know who he is, he's a extremely conservative money radio talk show guy where basically people just call in and talk about their money problems. And his whole thesis is that there's basically never a reason in the world to borrow money, right? He will allow people to borrow money to buy a house, to get a mortgage, but there's no other reason to get a loan. Don't have credit cards. Like, credit cards are evil. And
when you say conservative, you kind of mean, I mean, he may be conservative. I don't know his political affiliation, but
Yeah.
he's conservative in the sense that like don't risk and gamble anything.
Right.
Only buy what you can buy with cash.
I'm sure he's extremely conservative. From
Right.
a
I
political
just wanted to
standpoint
clarify
as well.
that because what you're saying is a conservative view of money.
Yeah. Like most investors would say you should borrow as much money as possible and to buy real estate because interest rates are so low.
You can make more money in a market or
Yeah.
in an equity than you could.
And he's completely against that. Well, I'm a huge fan of Dave Ramsey. I've always felt like he's been a little bit extreme by saying like you can't have credit cards. I've had credit cards my whole adult life. I've never once had a balance that I wasn't able to pay or whatever. I've never paid an interest
There's
payment.
a lot of perks you can get. You can get flyer miles. And all kinds
Exactly.
of
So
stuff.
I feel like he's kind of extreme on the other end, but a lot of people argue that he has to be because the people that he's helping are so bad with money. It's like an alcoholic or something. You just have to like go cold turkey. You can't tempt them with these things. Anyway, he's painted himself in this corner where you can't take out any loans. So of course, all of the calls he's getting right now have to do with the coronavirus and people's jobs being shut down and being laid off and blah, blah, blah. So these business owners are calling in and saying, hey, I have to either let my employees go because we literally are making no money.
Or take these loans on from the government.
Yeah. And, my money guy is telling me that it's fine because I get 2.5 months for free. And Dave Ramsey is sticking to his guns and saying, this is a loan. This is not a grant. This is not free money.
Well, the thing is, what we told our folks here is, are you and your husband in good shape financially where you don't have to take an income from the business for a while?
I'd say we're okay for a few months.
Yeah, like if you didn't take an income for 1 month, you could keep your people?
Yes.
Yeah. I would look at you not taking an income before I laid people off, and I would look at laying people off before I took out a loan. The problem with the PPP loan is it is a loan. Mm-hmm. It has a term with an interest rate. It is not a grant. It has provisions, and you can pull the law up and read it. It's available on the internet. It has provisions for forgiveness of the loan, and that's why your advisors are acting like it's free money. If you meet those provisions exactly, and if they don't change the game in the middle of it, and you're dealing with the SBA and the federal government, and frankly, I don't trust their competence, and I don't trust Congress to not change the game. So I am never going to borrow money. I can tell you at Ramsey, the first thing that will happen is our leadership team will go without pay. The second thing will happen is that another layer of our leaders would volunteer likely to go without pay. The third thing that would happen is we would go, everybody else skips a paycheck so that nobody loses a job. And way after that would be furloughs and layoffs. And I think you're a ways away from this, and I think these guys are just going, this is free money, and I don't think it's free money. This ain't Monopoly. This is real life. Those are real dollars, and they're going to want them back if you don't meet the guidelines. I disagree vehemently with the advice you've been given. Avoid the PPP.
And he does not believe that the government is going to hold up their end of the deal.
Really?
Yeah. So
all of this idea that you can get these PPP programs and pay off, you use the money to pay very specific things and it will be forgiven. We don't know how that's going to happen yet. Maybe it's like when you file your tax return for the year, it's going to be like what money and produce receipts. But the idea is that if you spend it on payroll and rent and you meet the requirements, which are a little tricky to navigate, that money will be forgiven. He thinks that the government is not going to uphold that end of the deal.
That's what he thinks. I mean, a lot of conservative people have very little faith in the government at all. But he just is telling people, I don't think this is going to be as simple as this. If you make one little mistake, you're going to owe all this money. And although some of the money can be used to pay your rent and business expenses, I think the majority of it is supposed to go to paying employees that are not working. It's a very tricky situation. But he basically said,
fire everybody?
I will fire my employees before I accept this money. But to be fair, he did say, he was like, I will stop taking money. The next layer down of executives will stop taking money, and everyone will take a month off of taking money in my business to make sure no one has to get laid off before I let anyone go. I mean, I respect his position. He obviously really cares about his employees on one hand, but on the other hand, he's paying into this program. I mean, we're all paying into it with taxes and everything. So is it morally wrong to accept the money? And I certainly, I mean, if the government didn't hold up their end of the bargain, that would be a whole other uproar, you know? I can't imagine that's going to happen.
I mean, that seems crazy. That seems crazy, but I don't know. I keep wondering how the government's going to have all of this money, because there's so many people out there that are like, we have friends that are like, suddenly the government has money to give us every month, and they've been holding out on us. And I'm like, that's absolutely the wrong way to look at this. It's not that the government has this money. They just pulled out of thin air, saved for a rainy day. But they did just pull it out of thin air. And so I don't know what the answer is there. I know a lot of people that are business owners that I've been talking to in some of my WhatsApp groups are just saying, yeah, fire your employees and let them go on unemployment, because that's the beast we know. We know what to expect with unemployment, and maybe the numbers are a little different. Maybe you make a few $100s less a paycheck or a month than what you would do if you could keep your job or be furloughed or any of that. But this whole idea is, I mean, we're already out of the money, right? There's no more PPP money. And we think it was supposed to be for 2.5 months, and we're now a month and a half into that program. And Congress, I haven't turned on the news today, but I think the president over the weekend said he hopes to have more money by Monday, but I have very little faith that that happened today. So, you know, and like my parents are complaining, they had their application in process for like a week. And then when it finally, you know, there's all these little errors in it. When it finally got approved, the money was out, and they were complaining about all these companies getting money that weren't qualified to get the money. And you saw it's like, is it Potbelly, and it's Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, and then Shake Shack. And I don't know how they played this game, but it's like maybe the one store had less than 500 employees, but then combined they had thousands and thousands of employees. I think Shake Shack is now, they're saying they're giving the $20 million that they took back.
Really?
Yeah.
Secretary Steve Mnuchin and Democratic lawmakers say they are very close to an agreement to pour billions more into the Paycheck Protection Program, aimed to help small businesses stay afloat during the crisis. The first time around, some companies in much better financial positions were some of the first to get these loans. One restaurant chain recognized this, Shake Shack, announcing it will return the entire $10 million loan it received. Founder Danny Meyer writing that the company is returning the money so that restaurants that need it most can get it now.
I don't know. There's so much room for fraud here, and there's so much room for abuse. And on one hand, people are saying the IRS will never be able to audit all of this stuff because there's just too much. I mean, they're already understaffed.
Right.
But then other people like Dave Ramsey are probably saying, I don't want to get caught in that if it does come down to it, you know?
Well, that's the situation that I'm kind of in, is like, as a business owner, it all depends on how much money is really going to me and my employees versus just them being on unemployment, right? Like, let's say I get no money and the money just goes all to my employees for X amount of time or whatever.
Yeah.
But let's just say, for argument's sake, they could get a similar amount of money with the stimulus and unemployment, and they could just do the paperwork that's much more simple and streamlined on their end. And then once things come back, they just start working for me again. And then I don't have to like prove things to the IRS, and like that does seem
it's less risky
easier,
for you as
less
the owner.
risky. We know that you don't have to pay back unemployment.
Yeah.
So that does seem a little easier, but maybe unemployment pays less money. I think unemployment might pay 50% of what you're...
The difference there is if you get the money from the PPP, it's riskier, but at least you're getting money to cover your rent. If you fire everyone and send them all into unemployment, it makes you ineligible, I believe, for the PPP. And at that point now, if you don't own your own business, your own property, you now have to at least start paying the rent every month to keep the business afloat. So I think that's the idea, is you take the PPP money and you take this risk that nobody's saying is a risk right now. They're just saying, oh, it's all forgiven money. But it seems like there still is a risk there. I'm worried people are going to not follow the rules exactly right. But that's going to be millions and millions of small businesses. And then what? Is the IRS going to come after every one of those people?
And I can just see a million situations where you do like, let's put your parents, for example. They've got the dental practice. They have dental assistants who have already filed for unemployment. Your parents get the PPP money. They send checks to the dental assistants, but the dental assistants don't reveal that to the unemployment office. So now they're double dipping. They're getting unemployment, plus they're getting PPP money from your parents.
I would imagine that would all come out in the wash when you file your tax return. Because I imagine it's like a W-2. My parents would say, we paid these paychecks under this new number, whatever that could be, to them. And if they don't report that they got that on their tax return, then they are doing fraud. But if they do report it, then maybe they also report their unemployment. Those two things would come up as like,
maybe, but I could see a situation where your parents do everything right, but the IRS comes and goes, nope, Susan was actually on unemployment through that entire time. You do not get this.
Well, I mean, my dad is acting like right now everyone is on unemployment. He's like, I haven't really fired anybody, but they all went and got unemployment.
Right.
So what happens with that unemployment money? Do they have to then give that back to the government once they get the PPP checks? That it just seems like such a mess.
I agree.
And the other thing is it's so incredibly complicated. Everyone is stressing out over this because CPAs, even the lawmakers, when you read the law, I mean, we've had it highlighted in our WhatsApp groups where on one hand, it's like 1099s are not counted, but then on the other hand, it's like 1099s up to $100,000 are included. It seems like the bill itself, I don't know if they've amended this, but there's contradictions in the bill itself. So you can imagine how frustrated business owners are going to be when they're trying to navigate these waters and it doesn't make any sense.
Dave, this is really key. I've been talking to a lot of business owners, and they're saying, I think we're going to take the grant. We're going to figure out how to get the grant. It's not a loan.
It's not a grant.
It's a 7A SBA loan. There's a reason they didn't just cut you a check. And so people got to understand this is a debt. There are a lot of conditions to meet for potential reimbursement if that comes, and you're increasing your risk to take it. And so, no, I think it's foolish to think this is free money, which is how it's being talked about out there.
Let's just pretend that Ramsey Solutions ran out of cash. We would be laying people off before we would take that. It's that simple. And I don't want to. It'd be the worst day of my life. In 30 years, we've never laid off a soul for reasons of economics. And but I'm not borrowing money, even with the promise of it being forgiven. Just like I'm not going to tell you to borrow money on a student loan with the promise it was going to be forgiven. Remember that promise they made? I remember that promise they made, and they didn't keep it. And so I'm just telling you. Now, there's going to be some tax breaks that you can do. You can write off your payroll taxes.
Payroll tax.
And I would do that for sure. I'll be doing that. I got a bunch of that I can write off. The second problem is that this is a loan that has been done during a stimulus package with the promise of it being forgiven. As soon as the political tide shifts one way or the other, that'll be revisited. And there's no chance I would step up on that rug and let a different person coming into the White House or a different tide in the political climate happen. They forget the promises that they made when it was stressful. They just do. Because they build other crap into this stuff, and it's just, I'd stay away from it.
Well, I have heard from one person who said that they've gotten some sort of like prepayment for some of these loans or something, not the full amount, but just like 10 grand or something. Everyone else, I haven't heard of anyone getting the stimulus check. I was talking to my brother. My brother has not.
Stimulus being what, the $1,200?
Yeah, the $1,200.
Oh, I've heard a lot of people getting that.
Okay, my brother still hasn't. My brother's applied for unemployment. He's heard nothing back from that. He's also, I think he had tried to apply for one of the loans, SBA loan or something. Heard nothing from that.
Yeah.
So he's like, I don't even know who to call, because you go to these websites, all the websites are down. You call the number, it goes straight to voicemail, or it's like the line is disconnected. So luckily, he has a lot of savings. He's been good with his money, but I don't know what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, it's super frustrating. I'll put this on the screen. It was like a meme that came out well before the stimulus money was coming in, but it was like, I got my stimulus check, and it shows the $1,200 deposited into their Wells Fargo account. And I sent it to Pi Jers, and he's like, "Oh, awesome, man. I didn't get mine yet." And I'm like, "Did you read the other lines on the statement?"
What were the other lines?
It's like $300 spent on Pornhub.
Oh.
And, and it's like, if you read the other lines, you're like, oh, that's pretty funny. But Pi didn't catch that one. He didn't read the whole thing. But I was like, that's pretty funny.
But Pi's not getting the money, right? He makes too much money.
Yeah, he's not getting it. But like, I was just like, Pi, you don't get the joke.
Right.
And he's like, no. And I'm like, just read the whole thing. Another thing big in the news right now is, and I don't know much about this, but oil is like, when adjusted for inflation, is at an all-time low. And there are some crude oil companies in Canada that have like a negative percentage. And so people are saying like, you were being paid to take the crude oil, and like hold it.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about this.
And you know how commodities work? Like most of the time you just buy and trade commodities, but you never actually take delivery of that commodity. People in our community are like, no, we need silos to take the crude oil and then sell it in a few months. And the only way to do this is to actually take, if you buy bushels of whatever, wheat or something, you have to actually take the wheat. But nobody ever does that. They make these futures contracts where you're just selling and trading before they ever come to fruition. But something has gone on in the oil market today where oil dropped like 30%.
Oil prices tanking today, dragging the markets lower as well. The Dow down over 500 points. MSNBC host David Gurr is here with me now. And David, oil prices have been at record lows for weeks now. But I mean, we just saw crazy historic drops in U.S. crude today. What on earth is going on?
Yeah, this is a level that we haven't seen before. And without getting too much into the weeds here of oil futures contracts, this has to do with oil contracts for the month of May. And the broader story here is folks who have those contracts just don't have any place to put this oil, and they have some optimism. You look at contracts farther out, June contracts, they're worth a bit more. The thinking is that demand will pick up here as the summer goes on. But what this is showcasing for everyone, I think, is the fact that demand is at this unprecedented low in so many countries around the world. There is no demand for oil at this point in time. We're all in our houses, not traveling. And you look at where oil is being stored on tanker ships, on storage facilities across the country, certainly in Cushing, Oklahoma, where this is all priced. There's just a sense that there isn't a whole lot of room, that these storage spaces are going to fill up in just a matter of weeks. That's what's driven oil to these incredibly low prices, down negative $37.63 a barrel for WTI. As I say, we've never seen anything like that before.
And I don't know enough about it to...
Yeah, every time you hear something like this and you go, man, I should get paid to fill up all my cars with gas, it's not that simple. There's something complicated about it, and only countries are able to get paid to hold oil. And
well, my investing group is talking about this, but then our neighborhood group is also talking about it.
Yeah.
The difference is the investing group is like me. I don't quite understand what this is. But then our neighborhood group that have very smart people that might have the means to actually do something.
Yeah.
They're like, how can we really fill up? Like, we should go to a refinery here in Puerto Rico that's dead.
Yeah.
And we should fill oil. And I'm just like, this seems for a couple $1,000s profit. Like, this
I don't
just
know.
seems,
I mean, it could be millions of dollars profit if you could hold enough.
You would think if you're going to take that kind of risk and go through those efforts. It just seems like jumping through too many loops. But
you're jumping through loops or hoops?
Both of them. Loops. Like loops. Stock market closed today, 17 minutes ago, minus 1.79%. Dow Jones down 2.44%.
Yeah, stock market's still crazy. I'm still expecting a major crash in the next few months, but it seems to kind of be trading sideways. Sideways for recent times, like up and down 2% every day, but not up and down 9% every day like it has been.
Gold's up 11% on the month.
Hell yeah.
It's not bad.
Yeah, thank goodness I bought lots of gold, because a lot of the other bets I've been making have been horrible. What's Tesla doing? My Tesla short position at $650 is probably not doing well right now. Tesla's at $750.
You're starting to tempt me now to do the short.
I keep thinking about putting more money into this short against Tesla, not because I want Tesla to fail, but just because I feel like it's so overpriced for this moment.
Yeah.
It makes no sense. Well, the last thing that I want to talk about just to end on a really negative note.
No, perfect.
Is that after talking to the intelligent, kind Swedes yesterday, I have just been noticing how much more divided we are in the United States.
Yeah.
And you know how heated the abortion debate gets, because people kind of like talk past each other, you know? One side is fighting for what they believe is women's rights, and the other side is fighting for what they believe is literally murdering children. But when they argue with each other, they only argue their side. It's like they can't even hear what the other side's saying, because it's like, you have no control over my body, or like you're a baby murderer. Well, the same thing is happening with this. And, you know, a lot of people on the right are saying like, hey guys, this is where money and everything we have comes from. The whole society that we like, and the fact that we have roads and hospitals, and the fact that we have Walmart filled with food and everything, is because we work.
Yeah.
And then the other side is like, you just want to murder people so the stock market goes up in value. And they're like, are you crazy? No, we see what's coming in the future. The future is like total collapse of society if we do this long enough. Like, we're a long way off from that.
Right.
But if we did this for a year, yes, there would be like looting and riots, and it would be an absolute nightmare. And then the other side is like, why don't you choose who has to die, you know, so that you can, and people are just talking past each other, and it's extremely frustrating, because you go on Fox News and you hear, you know, people kind of saying like, listen, every day we take risks, we got to go to work, blah, 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 blah. And then you go on liberal media, or especially some of these liberal talk shows that aren't really news.
Yeah.
And you have people on the opposite side, which I just feel like both sides are probably, you know, the truth is somewhere in the middle.
Make of that. And what side do you see both sides, or are you leaning in one direction?
Well, Ainsley, rarely has there been a topic I've been so passionate to get on the air and discuss than this. Of course I see both sides. I have a family, and I have 2 children myself. I have a mother-in-law and 2 parents that are still alive that obviously I care deeply about. My mother herself is in an extremely high-risk category. If she were to contract this, it could be deadly. But Ainsley, I have to feed my kids too. So does everybody around me, you know. And I watched that clip before the break of Nancy Pelosi seemingly confused about what protesters were doing. Well, let me enlighten you, Nancy, because you seem to be living in an insulated $25,000 freezer ice cream bubble, and you don't get it. Here it is, plain and simple. People have to feed their families. These are smart Americans who are intelligent. They understand there's a risk. They live with risk every day. If you need to understand that, Nancy, go talk to a construction worker on a construction site down the block that is living with multi-million-dollar equipment that could kill him in a minute. If you tell him or her on that site, you're going to need to wear a mask. There are precautions. We may have to wear some kind of hand protection, wash our hands often, and we may have to distance, but you'll be able to go to work and feed your kids. I promise you, the entrepreneurial, brave American citizens will figure it the hell out. Get out of your bubble. People have to feed their kids. That is what's going on right now.
And Dan, I'll talk to you afterwards, but just to give people an idea of what they might have missed is Nancy Pelosi's halting delivery in trying to explain what the protesters are up to.
Can you understand why they're doing that?
No, not really, because what we have to do is shelter in place. That is really the answer. Testing, tracing, treatment, shelter in place. And I do think that it's unfortunate. But, you know, people will do what they do. But the fact is we're all impatient. We all want out. But what they're doing is really unfortunate.
But what they're doing is not unfortunate. They're doing is exercising their rights. They could have been socially distant protesting. I get that. And there are places that are hot spots. But, Dan, if you do put in sprinklers for a living, in-ground sprinklers, and you say you can only do it during certain times, you got to wear a certain mask, let them do it.
Okay.
You
want me to debate?
You have nothing to add to this?
I mean, I've been reading this Confessions of a Economic Hitman, and it's super intriguing. And I'm always trying to take it with a grain of salt. Like, this guy has some agenda. I'm in a chapter now where we gave up the Panama Canal back to Panama. And then, I didn't know this, but like in 1989 around Christmas, the United States, we went in there and just carpet bombed Panama with absolutely no reason.
What?
Yeah, it's like one of the worst like human rights atrocities ever in America.
What was our excuse?
I think we wanted to, basically I believe Panama was trying to give control of the canal or to invest more in the canal back to China or to Japan. And the United States was like, that's the most valuable piece of property in the world, one of them. And so we weren't going to allow that. So we went in to like kill one of their military, it wasn't a dictator, but anyway, look it up.
Okay.
So anyway,
look into it, man.
Look into it.
25 years ago, on December 20th, 1989, a force of about 26,000 American soldiers invaded Panama in Operation Just Cause. General Manuel Noriega, who had ruled the country from 1983 to 1989, was removed from power, arrested, and brought to the United States for trial. Next, 7 minutes of video from the C-SPAN archives. First, the announcement of the operation by White House spokesman Marlin Fitzwater. Then President George H.W. Bush speaking from the Oval Office. And finally, some Pentagon video recorded in Panama during the invasion.
The President has directed United States forces to execute at 1:00 a.m. this morning pre-planned missions in Panama to protect American lives, restore the democratic process, preserve the integrity of the Panama Canal treaties, and apprehend Manuel Noriega.
I guess what I'm just trying to say is like everyone in America tends to believe that like we aren't controlled by dictators and we have freedom of press and we have all these freedoms and we don't have a corrupt society like China where the government is controlling the media. I mean, you're trying to get somebody on the podcast and many people can't even broadcast outside of China. And we look at that and say, oh my gosh, look at China. But in some ways, I feel like the media has a lot of pull in America. And the older I get, become more like my dad, and I start to think that, you know what, Fox News and CNN and CNBC are on this spectrum, but maybe the agenda of most of the news organizations is actually more or less the same. It's to rile people up and to keep Americans in fear so that they react in a way that's predictable. Because the reality is all of our presidents, maybe for the last 100 years, they've all been more or less the same. We like to believe that George Bush is over here and that Obama is over here. But when you actually look at the global policies of all these people, they're doing the same thing. You know, Republicans will say, look at Obama. He was putting immigrants in cages 10, 20 years, 10 or 15 years ago, and Trump's doing the same thing, but that was a policy started by Obama. And then you look at Obama's drone strikes, and well, guess what? That was something that George Bush was doing, So when you look at the presidents of the United States and you look at the policies of the United States, they're probably more in line than what we like to believe, but the reason that we believe they're so different is because of our media. Our media makes us believe you're on this side or you're on this side, and like, you gotta take a side, Yeah. But you look at Sweden, and it just feels like their media doesn't play off the people the same way. And maybe Americans would say, like Sweden's being fooled because they don't have all sides represented. But when you look at a place like China, or North Korea, or Russia, where their state owns the media itself, I don't know. It's you can go back and forth with all of this, but I think maybe Americans are being misled by believing that one side has the true intentions of, the people that they're preaching to. Because it does give you in a state of fear. When you see the way we ended our video yesterday, it makes you believe like, oh my gosh, like what is happening? What is Bill Gates doing,
Man,
and there's so many people in our community, really intelligent people that live in this community that are spreading these propaganda videos. Like we share them casually in our videos. There are a lot of people in this community that buy into this crazy talk.
Oh yeah, I mean it.
And I'm starting to wonder, like, how crazy are they? I mean, they're crazy, but I think a lot larger of the percentage of our population might actually believe some of this stuff.
Well, this actually reminds me that today we have a fan question.
Do you, Patrick and or Lee, ever think that just by the way people ask questions, do you ever think that maybe that some of the people that ask questions are truly insane? And if they weren't before, are they going to be after the COVID-19 lockdown?
I don't fully understand the question or like what he was getting at.
Yeah, I don't know that I understand the question at all. Is he insane?
Yeah. Do you need to listen to it again?
No, I think I
You
got it. But like, are people?
So the way I'm going to perceive this question is, do you feel like people are putting their bias into the way they're asking questions, or are the subject matter that people are asking questions about telling about, what's going on in their mind? And
This goes back to the issue I dealt with weeks ago, the confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Maybe?
A little bit.
Because, I think it's really important to ask a lot of questions, not just in this, but in everything. The way you run your business and spiritual world, like the way you make money, the way you're in a relationship. Like, I think it's good to always be open and ask as many questions, because the second you stop asking questions is time where you have no chance for growth, right? And you're just going to see the world the way that you've predetermined it before that point.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think we all have our biases, and I think somebody commented that like I was pushing my agenda by the questions I was asking the Swedes yesterday.
Yeah.
Because I'm super interested in the herd immunity thing.
Yeah.
And I thought that was Sweden's goal, but every time I brought it up,
people didn't know.
Well, they knew. They were like, yeah, that's what. But it didn't seem like that was Sweden's goal. Like,
Yeah.
we have to have as many people get this as possible without overloading the hospitals. That's what I thought the goal was. Yes, I think people ask questions about certain subjects that I'm always like, really? That's what you're thinking about? That's what's going on in your head? But this situation, I think, has exposed a lot of kooky people. And I don't think it's made more kooky people. Maybe it will in time. If you're just stuck inside and you don't get to live your life, you'll just go crazy.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of people who are very smart and successful, make lots of money, maybe have big businesses and stuff that you'd look up to. And they normally just don't really talk about what they believe.
But this gives them a chance to bring up stuff they normally wouldn't bring up?
Yeah, it just wouldn't come up in conversation, but now everyone's talking about it. So there's just friends that I have that say things, and I'm like, oh no, you're one of them. Like,
Yeah.
you feel like we need to go burn down 5G towers, or you feel like Bill Gates' goal in life is to murder children, or you think vaccines are made to control us like robots. It's just the weirdest
New World Order stuff.
Yeah, or even the Earth is flat. Like,
Hey,
I finally met a flat earther who...
A real flat earther.
A real flat earther. And, I'm like, we can see the International Space Station on certain days. Like, you can track it online, and with a telescope, you can see it. And he's like, I don't believe it. And I'm like, well, why don't you try to see it or look into it or whatever?
Yeah.
And he's like,
The one I love is they always use like lenses in this one. Like, they don't understand the idea of fisheye lenses and stuff. And so when they go up high, it's like flat. But if you shoot with a fisheye, it becomes round. And I haven't dug into this as much as you have. But
I have gone down deep.
I think Photograph of the World 3 or 4. This was something you were obsessed with. And I don't know if it made the behind the scenes of that, but everywhere we went, you were just showing Eli and I another flat earth video. And I think we were pulling our hair out like, Lee, get off of this topic.
I just find it fascinating what people can be convinced of relatively easily.
Yeah. The one that I'm interested in, that I think we're starting to see play out, but it's still not quite there, is the whole idea, is this virus man-made or manipulated? Because a few days ago, one of the main researchers who discovered the HIV virus came out, and he didn't come out in the clearest way, but he basically said he thinks that this virus has been manipulated. And there's been a whole bunch of controversy about this in the medical community. And for the most part, researchers are saying there's no evidence of this at all. But I've dug deep into some websites, scientific websites, where they're using a program called BLAST. And BLAST is basically where you can take the genome sequence and throw it into this computer and compare all of these sequences. And the rebuttal to this guy who says that says that this has manipulation in it is just that we can throw in HIV and we can throw in coronavirus, and it does not show any reasonable coincidences, or no sequences are being repeated. But when you dig in even deeper, and it's really hard to do this if you're not in that field, you can start to see where, like, you could take these peptides that are different, but they might encode the same protein. Or you might encode a protein that is different, which would say this isn't engineered, but those proteins might actually have the same binding specificities that would allow it to bind to the body. So all I'm trying to say is that...
Yeah, what are you trying to say?
All I'm trying to say is that you're seeing articles and you're seeing politicians, not just in America, but around the world, starting to say, wait a minute, what responsibility does China have in this? Was this something manufactured or tinkered with in a lab that just accidentally got out? I don't know that there's anything wrong with that. But did they cover that up? Or could this have been more malicious? Or could China have known that this was manipulated, but they're not letting us know that? Right at this very moment, we don't know the answer to that question. And I think a lot of people would say it's irresponsible to assume or hypothesize that this thing was manipulated. But we will find that out soon. And maybe this is going to be like weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, where we say in a year or two that it was manipulated and something comes out of it. And then 10 years later, we start to say, well, wait a minute, was it or was it not?
Well, something just came out. I think it came out today. I saw Ted Cruz talking about this, where we have now shown that the United States has paid some sum of money, I don't remember if it was like 75 grand, 300 grand, something like this, to the lab in Wuhan to study coronaviruses in bats.
Yeah.
Like in 2019, we sent a payment from our government to that lab.
It's possible.
To do it, but it's just
I mean, you know about all these guys in Harvard that were the espionage. They were all, I mean, this happened in, I don't know, don't quote me on it, but like the end of 2019.
We're here today to announce 3 separate cases highlighting the ongoing threat posed by Chinese economic espionage and research theft in the United States.
Federal investigators at the Lexington home of 60-year-old Dr. Charles Lieber today, moments after his arrest at his Harvard office.
The complaint alleges that Dr. Lieber signed a contract with the Chinese university in Wuhan and was paid up to $50,000 per month, plus up to $158,000 in living expenses.
The chair of Harvard's chemistry department, he also allegedly received more than $1.5 million to set up a research lab in China, all while working at Harvard and receiving multiple research grants from the U.S. Department of Defense and National Institutes of Health. Also charged today, 2 Chinese nationals, 29-year-old Yang Qingyi, who worked as a scientific researcher at Boston University,
who failed to mention on her visa application that she is also a lieutenant with the People's Liberation Army.
30-year-old Zhaozong Zhang worked on cancer research at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center.
For trying to smuggle vials of biological material out of the United States to China and lying about it to federal investigators.
So there's a lot of unanswered questions, and I don't think it's reasonable, going back to this question, I don't think it's reasonable to say, like, these are all conspiracy theories and all these people are kooks. I think you really have to look at this with an open mind, because the reality is these are the questions that the whole world is going to be examining under a microscope. And at the very moment, just because these blast softwares aren't finding what we think would be an obvious insertion, that doesn't mean that maybe something wasn't done. And I don't know, only time will tell. I don't want to say that I believe one way or another, but we're seeing more and more articles coming out on legitimate websites, news organizations that are starting to question what was China's play in this. And my fear is that this could get really ugly. I don't know what it will look like. I don't know that we're going to go to war with China because they're too powerful for that. But I think the world is going to come together in some way and say, how do we punish China for these actions?
I've seen 2 really interesting Bill Maher clips. One of them, I think you might have sent me a day or 2 ago. Is it Dan Crenshaw? Who's the guy?
Dan Crenshaw. He is a congressman from Texas, I believe.
The eye patch guy.
Yeah.
And
the only reason I saw this was Bill Maher was trending yesterday, maybe, as a show on Sunday.
I don't know. But I thought Dan did an excellent job of staying calm and just really laying the foundation of what was going on just a few months ago. We have such a bad memory, and people hate Trump so much that they want to believe that Trump is to blame for this.
Yeah.
And they want to believe that if Trump wasn't in power, every life could have been saved. And that Trump is purposefully trying to kill people because he's greedy. But the truth is that nobody on the left was worried about this in January or February either.
I mean, in America, there was a big debate on how ethical or how constitutional it is to lock down borders and not let people come in for a whole host of reasons, not just for coronavirus, but for terrorism threats and stuff. So the idea, I keep going back to this, the idea that any American president could have made that decision, I think that's not reasonable.
Well, and I think it's reasonable to say that a liberal president would have felt more pressure to not block certain countries from coming to the United States.
You were saying that about Bernie Sanders.
Because
if Bernie was president, maybe he would have not closed down flights to China.
We need to have the sick Chinese come here, and we will give them free health care.
Well, I think in this clip, and we'll play this here in a minute, I think one of the arguments Bill Maher was making was that we closed down flights to China, but we still let thousands of people from China in. And maybe the rebuttal is they were U.S. citizens. But then my thought is, like, why does it matter at all? Like, if we close down all flights everywhere, but we allow all Americans to come back, isn't that a problem? Like, that would be unconstitutional.
Especially without testing them.
It would be unconstitutional, I think, not to let people back, but it just seems all of that would be in vain. Because all the tourists, no matter where they are, they're getting it too. I mean, didn't they say in Sweden that a lot of people got it visiting Italy? And then they came back to Sweden and they got it from Italy? So, like, I don't know that the left or the right has a good argument in this at all. Like, it just seems like they're all trying to point fingers, but if you just remove all the politics, it doesn't seem like any of that would make any sense.
By March 3rd, there was only 102 cases in the United States, and yet I'm hearing criticism that we should have been locked down weeks earlier. But do you think the American people would have accepted that with only 100 cases in the United States? Italy didn't lock down until March 10th. Spain not until March 14th. UK not until later in March. This is like Sweden's never locked down. And so I provide all of that context as we try to basically accuse this man of being accused of having blood on his hands. And context is so important here.
Exactly.
It wouldn't change the outcome.
You know, it's like
no other country did it correctly.
Exactly. And the doctor in Sweden we were talking to yesterday deals with COVID patients daily and doesn't wear a mask.
Yeah.
She just wears a face shield and an open mouth. I'm like, what? I mean, I think the biggest argument that reporters have and people on the left have against Trump right now is that, like, okay, yeah, you did get the hospitals built and we didn't really need them. Okay, you did get enough ventilators in time, we didn't need them, but you did not get that PPE made in time. You did not get the gloves and the masks made in time. But it doesn't seem like there's enough gloves and masks anywhere in the world right now.
Yeah, my dad, I just talked to him today. He's really concerned about opening his dental practice months from now if the ADA requires that he wear an N95 mask. He's like, I don't even think we can get those. He's like, I bought one a month ago kind of as a joke. And now he's like, I definitely can't get those. So, yeah, I don't know. I always keep saying this political season is going to be so interesting because you already see people rising up and doing these demonstrations in a way that's unlike anything I've really seen before. And my gut tells me, as much as I don't really want Trump to be president next year, I think the numbers are going to be less severe than what we thought. The deaths are going to be lower than we thought. It feels like very few hospitals are hitting these thresholds, and all of a sudden bodies are pouring out in the streets.
I don't think any hospital has been overloaded in the United States.
And I think a lot of people are going to say, like, what in the world were we so scared about? And our economy might have crashed, but Trump didn't want that to happen.
Right.
And so I'm just worried we're going to get to the election cycle in October, and it's going to be like, who has the right narrative? And I can't imagine a Democrat having a narrative that makes much sense. You know, things weren't as bad as we thought. The economy's bad, but hey, we brought that on ourselves. And the rest of the world has very similar outcomes to what the United States has. You know, and if the stock market keeps going up and the government can keep printing money, I think Americans are going to find themselves like in a better position than some alternative, you know?
I'm not expecting things to look good financially.
I'm not either.
Voting comes around.
I think what we're doing is wrong, but I'm just saying, like,
Well, I think we should end this video with another clip from Bill Maher. I said in a previous video, I think Bill Maher is a super douche, but at the same time, he's very consistent. All of his points he seems to make logically, and I feel like he made a great point in this clip.
Well, now that we're starting to see some hope in all this, don't hope shame me. You know, the problem with nonstop gloom and doom is it gives Trump the chance to play the optimist, and optimists tend to win American elections. FDR said the only thing we have to fear